in association with Jaqua Lighting, inspired by the sun, moon and stars.
Hi, you're watching Gravitas with me, Sana Khan. On the show tonight, we get you the mystifying story of Otto Warmbier, a student at an elite American university who was arrested in North Korea. He was held there for more than a year and released about a week ago in a coma. The incident threatens to worsen relations between Pyongyang and Washington, and for the first time on Indian television. WION gets you the side of the story that one rarely gets to hear, that of North Korea's. We spoke to North Korea's ambassador to India. Before we get to that, here's a look at what's making headlines. Investigators uncover a huge cache of automatic guns, explosives and other ammunition from the home of 30-year-old Adam Deziri, who was killed during Monday's terror strike in Paris. Pakistan's deception has been exposed. Trump administration orders review of ties with Islamabad after incontrovertible evidence of its complicity in spreading terror in Afghanistan, and India warns of airstrikes if Pakistan doesn't mend its ways. Shiv Sena becomes the latest to back Ram Nath Kovind as India's 14th president, even as the opposition promises a contest. Sources tell WION the Congress may back Meera Kumar for president. And days after India's defeat at the hands of arch-rivals Pakistan, coach Anil Kumble steps down, informs BCCI he won't go to West Indies for India's tour. Talk of rift within Team India resurface. And later on, Gravitas Australia backs off in Syria, suspends its air campaign as part of the US-led coalition effort against Daesh after Russia declared it would target all airborne objects over the Syrian war zone. We also look at the staggering rise in civilian casualties and America's refusal to accept responsibility. We also will be talking about Tata's Advanced System Private Limited and US plane maker Lockheed Martin Corp. They've signed an agreement to produce F-16 fighters in India ahead of the government's plan to buy more fighter jets. This is important because India is likely to need 200 more fighter planes and has sought proposals for single-engine crafts. All right, but we start with the biggest story first. According to a report published by the Wall Street Journal dated 18th of June, North Korea's top nuclear negotiator, Madam Choi Soon-hee, has secretly met with US officials in Pyongyang and European cities to establish a diplomatic channel and orchestrate the release of prisoners. Now, it also goes on to talk about Otto Warmbier, how his condition while he was still alive could further complicate the tensions between Washington and Pyongyang. WION is the first Indian television channel to get you the official stance of the North. WION's Ramesh Ramachandran caught up with North Korea's ambassador to India, Kye Chun Yong. We will be playing out some excerpts from that interview on the show tonight to get a sense of the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, the relationship with India, nuclear tests and the possibility of finding a peaceful solution to ease tensions with the United States.
Under the certain circumstances, we are willing to talk in terms of the freezing the nuclear testing or missile testing. For instance, America side completely stopped big large-scale military exercise, temporarily or permanently. Then we are also temporarily stopped. Let's talk about how to solve the Korean issue peacefully.
All right, we'll be talking more about what the North Korean ambassador told WION. Joining me here live from the newsroom is WION senior correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran. Ramesh, now Kim Jong-un, who is the supreme leader of North Korea, how confident are you from what the ambassador has said that he can follow up on this assurance that he's given?
Right, Sana. So North Korea may be isolated in the international community, but it is seldom that we hear a North Korean diplomat hold forth so eloquently and forthrightly on issues concerning North Korea and the region and the world at large. That said, it is important from the point that he makes in the interview to WION, he generally and broadly outlines or indicates that the North Korean leadership and the government might be open for talks with some members of the international community, and also open to consider or at least explore the possibility of a nuclear moratorium, a moratorium or freeze on its strategic weapons program, including missile tests and the nuclear issue.
All right, Ramesh, stay on with us. That's a long interview. We'll be playing it out tomorrow for our viewers. But let's also quickly listen into what the North Korean ambassador said while speaking to Ramesh on the nuclear threat, the defense strategy, and also, on the dangers of nuclear flashpoint.
Korean War means nuclear war. If the nuclear war happened in the Korean Peninsula, it's really fratricidal war. So at any cost, we should prevent another Korean War. India is one of the, the member of the founder, NAM, is played a very important role representing the third world countries so far. So far, that's why my government all the time is supported the Indian government. So especially, we honestly want India should be surely the permanent member of the UNSC, UN Security Council. UN is founded in 1945. During that time, 70 years ago founded, but the world much changed. But the UN system is not changed. So the UN system also should be changed according to the changed world now.
All right, a couple of things here, Ramesh. First up, what sense did you get from the ambassador when he spoke about India? He's surely backing India's bid to the UNSC. What more did he indicate?
Right, Sana. So clearly he outlined the broad contours of the North Korea, or DPRK as it's called, and India relations, bilateral ties, and he was very forthright in saying that both India and North Korea are members of the non-aligned movement, and to that extent they have a strategic convergence of ideas, as it were, on global issues. But that said, the main issue confronting the region and the world at large is the so-called nuclear flashpoint. The situation obtaining on the Korean Peninsula today, what with the Americans and the new leadership under President Trump saying that the situation might get out of hand if the countries neighboring North Korea do not get together and lean on the Korean regime, as it were, to go slow, if not entirely roll back or dismantle its strategic program. So there are a lot of questions remain unanswered. But that said, the indications coming out of Pyongyang are that North Korea might be open for talks, especially with the United States. Remember, they are, although they are open to the idea of talking to their southern neighbor, South Korea, but the ambassador told us in so many words that if they at all were to talk to anybody in the international community, that would be to the U.S., because they don't want to talk to the proxies of the U.S., as it were, because remember, the U.S. and North Korea do not have diplomatic ties, and it remains to be seen how the backroom dealings or maneuvers going forward can start or resume talks in a very nascent way between the North Korean regime and the international community at large.
Right. In fact, let's get in Professor M.D. Nalapath. He's a professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at the Manipal University. He joins us live from New Delhi. Professor Nalapath, it's important for you to listen to what the North Korean ambassador has said on a number of issues. I'm going to go and play that soundbite back to you when he says that we're willing to talk in terms of freezing our nuclear and missile tests. He talks in relation with the United States. Let's listen into that first.
Under the certain circumstances, we are willing to talk in terms of the freezing the nuclear testing or missile testing. For instance, America side completely stopped big, large-scale military exercise, stop temporarily or permanently. then we are also temporarily stopped. Let's talk about how to solve the Korean issue peacefully.
Professor Nalapat, what do you make of this statement? Do you think this is a sentiment that the Supreme Leader of North Korea would also be echoing, that we are ready, for a reconciliation? Does that seem a realistic possibility, looking at the way things are?
Well, I'd like to congratulate your channel on this interview. And I'd like to point out that this interview could not have taken place unless there is a very clear okay from the highest level of leadership in North Korea, namely the Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. So clearly they have used Indian media, Indian television, specifically your channel, to send a message to the world, principally the United States. And that message is, look, as far as we are concerned, we are open to a moratorium, we are open to a stoppage of any further tests, etc. If you are open to a scaling back of your own military exercises and military maneuvers in the region. Let me remind you, the North Korean regime is now developing its nuclear and missile capability, not really for attack but for defense. They are extremely worried about the prospect of regime change. They have seen that in Libya, they have seen that, they are seeing efforts in Syria, they have seen that in Iraq, and they do not want their regime to follow the example of Iraq and Libya and go in for the kind of regime change that America and its allies have inflicted on those countries. So this is essentially a defensive maneuver, but to Japan, to South Korea, to the United States, it's an extremely alarming situation when a small country like North Korea, which frankly the United States cannot penetrate in terms of its leadership. The United States can heavily penetrate Pakistan, can heavily influence Pakistan, also a kind of a rogue terror state, but they can't influence North Korea. So clearly this is a very, very difficult situation for the United States, but it's also a very clear hint by Kim Jong-un that so far as he is concerned, India also has a role to play.
Right. In fact, my colleague Ramesh there asked the North Korean ambassador point blank, are you going to test your intercontinental ballistic missile? And this is what he had to say.
America continuously threatening. Of course, Trump say, America President Trump said there are so many options, including the military way. So that we should be ready, both of them, dialogue and then military way. So in certain circumstances, our demands is met, we can negotiate in terms of the moratorium of such weapons testing.
Ramesh, very quickly coming to you now. It wasn't a simple yes or a no answer as we heard there. Do you still get the impression, and fairly so, that the North is simply choosing to keep its options open?
Indeed, Sana, and just to take off from the point where Professor Nalapat left, in the interview, the North Korean ambassador, laid it out very clearly that the justifying the decision why North Korea chose to go nuclear, one, because of the security situation obtaining in its neighborhood in the last many decades, number one, and number two, in his words, it was a very arduous decision taken to uphold or protect its right to existence. So, in a sense, he could not have put it more bluntly or categorically that it is, as Professor Nalapat pointed out, a deterrent, as it were, and one which was preempted, as it were, by the American maneuvers in the region and beyond. But that said, Sana, the big takeaway for me from that interaction was that, one, he was very categorical and he said yes when he was asked specifically whether North Korea was open to the idea of considering a freeze or a moratorium on both nuclear.
We're going to be playing out that
testing.
soundbite as well, Ramesh. That's right. Professor Nalapat, what's your assessment of what he said when we asked him about the ICBMs and what the North Korean regime believes should be the way forward? Should it continue to do what it's doing at this point, which is, of course, turning out to be an escalation of tensions in the peninsula at this point?
Well, let's not forget the fact that North Korea is a regime under siege. the fact is that South Korea, Japan, United States feel threatened by North Korea, but North Korea itself is definitely threatened by these three powers. From that point of view, the problem is a lack of trust. We saw in Iraq, Saddam Hussein surrendered his WMD. Saddam Hussein, you know what happened to him. Mr. Gaddafi surrendered his WMD. We all know. I mean, it's there on YouTube as to what happened to Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. So the North Koreans are studying these situations. And they are very clearly of the view that if they surrender their nuclear weapons, then what is to prevent them from being another Libya or another Iraq? So the problem is the trust deficit. So I personally am very, very doubtful that the North Koreans are going to surrender their nuclear weapons. I think they're going to hold on to their nuclear weapons. At the same time, they're not interested in provoking a war. So they would like a kind of a standstill situation in which they have their weapons, which gives security to the present regime in North Korea. And at the same time, there's an effort at normalization of relations, especially with the United States, which they regard as the biggest threat to their regime.
So normalizing, efforts to normalize the situation, but at the same time maintaining a status quo as far as, you know, getting into that sort of a dangerous territory is concerned. Professor Nalapat and Ramesh, do stay with me. That all-important soundbite is coming up next, where Ramesh asks the North Korean ambassador about talks with the US. Let's listen in.
If I understood correctly, Ambassador, you were saying that DPR Korea is open to the idea of a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests.
Yes.
And are you also open to the idea of talks with the US anytime, anywhere?
Yes, anytime, but without any precondition.
All right, Ramesh, that response was rather interesting. You know, does that mean that talks will happen with no preconditions from the US, or is Korea trying to say North that we will talk under any circumstances? We're all in for talks. It's a positive step.
Sana, to my mind, any North Korean diplomat could not have put it more bluntly or categorically, especially from a regime or a state which is run with a tight fist, as it were. For such a diplomat to make a comment so categorical, I think to my mind is unprecedented. But that said, to my mind, the North Koreans have lobbed the ball, as it were, into the American court. It is for the Americans now to take a position on whether they would want to resume talks at any level whatsoever going forward, and also the contours of those talks. Would it be a bilateral talk? Would it be also other parties involved? Remember, we had a 6-party talks not so long ago, which has since been suspended. So a lot of questions remain unanswered, but the fact remains that the North Koreans have signaled their intent, as it were, to open a channel of communication. And by the way, remember, Sana, this interview comes amid reports of the North Korean nuclear negotiator meeting with American officials not only in Pyongyang but in third countries. So this is nothing short of unprecedented, to my mind, what the ambassador had to tell us.
Right. It's a very important soundbite nonetheless. Professor Nalapat, what do you make of the statement? He said, yes, we're in for talks anytime, but without preconditions. What does this tell you about what is going on in the mind of Kim Jong-un as of this point?
No, let me remind you that Donald Trump, when he campaigned, said very clearly he is ready to welcome a direct discussion with Kim Jong-un. Now, Donald Trump, frankly, showed a very refreshing new approach to foreign policy, which is why the traditional establishment is gone after him and is trying its level best to get him removed from power, so that he will remain with the same failed policies of the last 50, 60, 70 years. Now, if Donald Trump, for example, were to reach out to the North Korean leadership and say, look, I'm ready to speak to Kim Jong-un, I'm sure he'll find a willing partner. But the point is, this cannot be on the basis of the policy of the last 30 or 40 years, that first North Korea has got to downsize the nuclear arsenal, first North Korea has got to give up all these nuclear weapons, it's got to open itself to inspection, then we'll have talks. The North Korean ambassador is very clearly saying we'll have talks first. And if those talks can build trust, then further measures can come. But as of now, frankly, what they're saying is they don't have trust in the United States. They believe that if they surrender their weapons, the way the Libyans did, the way the Syrians did, the way the Iraqis did, then they will end up the same way as these countries have.
Absolutely, a point taken. But, regardless of what Donald Trump had said, a lot has changed in that time period. And today he's calling North Korea a brutal regime. Let's take a look at this other story that's also talking a lot about the relations between North Korea and the US. Professor Nalapat, I'd request you to please stay on with me. Ramesh, thanks so much for joining us for the moment now. A 22-year-old US student, Otto Warmbier, he died in coma on Monday. Warmbier was imprisoned and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in North Korea last year. He lapsed into a coma in March 2016, shortly after he was sentenced, and then was arrested earlier because he was trying to steal an item bearing a propaganda slogan, according to media reports emerging from North Korea. Warmbier was released just last week after the US State Department's special envoy to North Korea, Joseph Yun, traveled to Pyongyang and demanded for his release on humanitarian grounds. North Korea claimed that Warmbier slipped into a coma after contracting botulism and being given sleeping pills. However, doctors have found no sign of these kind of drugs either. US President Donald Trump has offered his condolences to the family during a statement earlier.
How I have made the worst mistake of my life. Otto Warmbier has just passed away. He spent a year and a half in North Korea. A lot of bad things happened, but at least we got him home to be with his parents.
All right, Professor Nalapat, do you think the death of this 22-year-old student has put Trump back to square one as far as North Korea is concerned?
Well, I hope Trump can escape the people who are the Clinton people, for example, because there are a lot of failed policies and a lot of the problems that the international community is facing is because of the Clinton-Bush policies. Trump should change those policies. And the question is whether he'll have the strength to do that or whether the attacks on him will become too strong. My theory about the Warmbier release, and I must confess it's only a theory, is that the North Koreans wanted to send a message to the Americans, most probably about some biological warfare operations. Quite likely that Mr. Warmbier, unfortunately, was probably consumed some kind of a chemical substance which affected his nerves and as a consequence became a human vegetable. So I think, if my theory is right, the North Koreans want to demonstrate to the United States that, look, we are extremely advanced in the sphere of biological and chemical weapons. This is what we can do. So you please understand that this is a capacity. If you recall, North Korea has, on some occasions, done a lot of cyber weaponry as well, and they've done a lot of cyber attacks. Okay. Even a very recent cyber attack on the entire globe has been authoritatively pinned at the door of North Korea. So I think Warmbier's release was basically a statement to the military establishments of the United States, Japan and South Korea that this is our capacity, and if we let loose this capacity on tens of thousands of citizens, then you know what that can mean.
Right. Also, Professor Nalapat, Donald Trump said it's a brutal regime and we will be able to handle it. Here's what Rex Tillerson said. He said North Korea is accountable for Warmbier's unjust imprisonment, and they are now demanding for the release, and have been for a while now, the 3 other U.S. Citizens who are being held in North Korea. What happens now is a crucial question. Remember, after the Syrian chemical weapons attack, Trump went in, fired cruise missiles on Assad's regime. What can happen in this situation?
Well, I'd like to point out that the North Koreans are a bit different from Assad. They have access to nuclear technology and nuclear weapons, which frankly give them the same immunity that, for example, Pakistan has got. Why is it that Pakistan can play with terrorism? Why is it that the Pakistan military can, on the one hand, kill Americans through the Taliban and through its proxies, and the Americans can do nothing but, frankly, just wring their hands in helplessness because it's a nuclear weapons power. So that is the goal that North Korea has got. So my own point of view is very, very clear that the North Koreans want to demonstrate the consequences of any attack. and they want to show that if an attack comes on North Korea, it's going to be an extremely horrible situation. So my own view is that eventually what they want is to continue having nuclear weapons, but a kind of a ceasefire situation, as for example we are seeing with Pakistan. I think North Korea wants to follow the Pakistan example of being de facto accepted as a nuclear weapon state.
So you're talking about a status quo.
Pakistan has created havoc for India.
Right. But sir, coming back to the
I'd like to say Pakistan is creating
let's stick to
havoc
North Korea.
in India.
Right, I get your point. Sticking to North Korea and the United States, you talked about a status quo. Do you think that is the answer? We've heard of diplomatic back channels, talks being held between officials from the United States as well as North Korea. Do you think that is the only way and the only logical way to move forward?
I think the logical way to move forward is to go ahead on a Korean unification platform, and that has got to be by the Koreans themselves. I don't believe the United States or India or China or any country should come up into it. The President Moon of South Korea would, I think, be willing to go in for that kind of negotiation. But as I said, I repeat, I don't believe the North Koreans are going to surrender their nuclear weapons. The best case scenario would be for unification talks to take place so that the relationship between the two sides of the demilitarized zone gradually become non-conflictual.
We hear your point of view. Thanks so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Thanks once again for joining us here. Meanwhile, for our viewers, you can tune in tomorrow at 8 p.m. to catch that exclusive interview with the North Korean ambassador to India, Ambassador Kye Chun Yong. That's tomorrow, 8 p.m.
And are you also open to the idea of talks with the US anytime, anywhere?